You're listening to SERP Stories, a podcast produced by the Strategic Education Research Partnership. The show is about people coming together to solve real problems in education by bridging research, practice, and design. I'm your host, Dr. Kayla Jones, and I'm so glad you're here. Each episode, I'll bring you stories from the educators, researchers, and designers working side by side to tackle our school's most urgent challenges. A little about me first. I'm a literacy specialist at SERP and a former high school English and AP literature teacher. I'm a native Floridian and a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and full disclosure, a devoted cat lover. But more than anything, I care deeply about being part of the solution to our nation's adolescent literacy crisis. And that's exactly what this inaugural season is all about. At the SERP Institute, we believe that solving big challenges in education start with breaking down silos between research and practice and between theory and the realities of the classroom. Each season, we'll take you inside a SERP project, how it began, the problem it set out to solve, who it's designed for, and what it looks like in action in our nation's schools. This season is especially personal for me. Before joining SERP, I spent years in the classroom teaching brilliant high school students, kids who could debate complex ideas but froze when asked to read out loud. In fact, they avoided it like the plague. It was like the words on the page were just out of their reach. They deserved stronger support, and they deserved it long before they reached my classroom door. That's what inspired me to complete my PhD in education and also led me to SERP, where I now work on a literacy-based Tier 2 middle school intervention called STARI, the Strategic Adolescent Reading Intervention. Through that work, my eyes were open to something that should have been obvious, but isn't talked about nearly enough. Just how many middle schoolers struggle to read, and how few systems are truly built to help them. And that's why we begin this season, by unpacking that problem and hearing from the people who decided to do something about it. For season 1, I interviewed various stakeholders to learn more about this big question. Why aren't more middle school students reading at grade level? And what can we do about it? Each episode, I'll share more from the researchers, teachers, school leaders, and curriculum designers who helped deepen my understanding of the students who arrive in middle school without strong reading skills, and what happens when the education systems meant to support them fall short. This phenomenon is commonly known as the adolescent literacy crisis. Here's Kamala Carnes, a principal in Baltimore, Maryland.
Everything starts with you knowing how to read and how to comprehend and how to understand that text and analyze. Without the basic foundation, kids are just not going to do well.
Across the country, far too many middle school students sit in classrooms unable to read the text in front of them, not because they aren't capable, but because somewhere along the way, we stopped supporting them. Sure, a small group of students who are formally identified as having learning disabilities may receive services, but far too many struggling middle school readers, especially those who don't get strong literacy instruction in the early grades, are simply left to fall through the cracks. As Dr. Margaret, Director of Literacy Research and Development at SERP explains,
most of the intervention research that has been done on trying to accelerate the growth of adolescent readers has showed little to no growth. I think it is a really complex problem because by the time you get to middle school, there are so many systems that go into being a proficient reader. There is the decoding, being able to decode the words at a pace that allows you to retain the meaning in your head and make sense of it. And then there's also background knowledge that has to go into comprehending the words that you have read, and vocabulary knowledge that has to go into comprehending those words, and knowledge of academic language and complex sentence structure. And perhaps most importantly, the motivation and engagement piece. And that's where I feel like STARI really makes a contribution, because by the time kids get to middle school and they're reading 2 or more years below grade level, they have experienced years of school failure, and they generally have pretty negative self-concepts of themselves as readers.
And let's just be clear, being just behind in 6th grade can quickly turn into being permanently behind at high school. Like me, Margaret has seen this firsthand. She knows middle school reading ability is a major predictor of whether or not you'll graduate. Margaret has been part of the STARI project since her grad school days. She brings both a researcher's insight and a practitioner's heart, having taught middle school reading in Baltimore and Washington, D.C.
So I was a middle school teacher, and I love teaching middle school. What I love about middle school is it's that sweet spot between the enthusiasm of childhood and the ability to think abstractly that comes more in high school. By middle school, they can understand these complex texts and complex issues. They have the cognitive capacity to do that. And they have probably not completely given up or burned out on trying to get better with their reading skills yet. There's also that statistically, kids who enter ninth grade reading below grade level are extremely likely to drop out and not finish high school. So in some ways, middle school is the time to catch them.
I share Margaret's strong conviction about the importance of middle school. So does Dr. Lowry Hemphill, one of Story's original developers. Like Margaret and me, she also began her career as a teacher before earning her doctorate. Here's how she describes the emotional toll that struggling to read takes on adolescents.
At that age, kids are I think even second and third graders are aware of this, right? But I think certainly in seventh grade, the message is this text was not selected for you. No one thought about you and your needs and probably your interests either when they selected this text. Even before you see the quizzes, you know that you're just not going to do well. And you're probably going to have a trouble passing this class. You may actually have to repeat this class in summer school. You may get held back. The message pretty clearly is you're not set up for success here. And I think what that feeds in kids is sort of almost like a self-defensive withdrawal. So this stuff doesn't matter anyhow. This stuff is not where it's at. This is not actually important to me. I'm going to put my hopes and my aspirations somewhere else, but it's not going to be about this classroom and about what's happening in school right now.
It is a painful truth. By the time students reach middle school, most reading interventions have faded, and with them, the hopes of catching up. When I was in the classroom, I often found myself frustrated and puzzled. My students were bright, but when the text in front of them felt impossible, their confidence evaporated. I remember asking myself, how did they make it to high school and still struggle to read? Sure, I'd seen some elementary reading interventions, but middle school, high school, it was like no one expected kids to still need that kind of support. As Margaret puts it,
I know there's been a lot of talk about growth mindset in the last, 10 years or so in education. But I think that understanding that when kids are resistant to reading and resistant to academics, that there is a story behind that, that they're not resisting because they want to give the teacher a hard time or because that's just who they are. They're just not an academically oriented kid. They're resisting because they have had bad experiences that have damaged their relationship with school and with reading and with academics. And we need to intervene in a way that is going to counteract those bad experiences. So rather than sort of throwing up their hands that this kid is getting in trouble and getting sent out of class every day, really figuring out probably that kid is getting sent out of class every day because they'd rather be the kid who won't do than the kid who can't do. They'd rather get sent out of class and spend the period sitting in the office than be embarrassed when the teacher asks them to read aloud and their peers hear that they can't pronounce the words correctly.
We have to counteract that and rebuild trust. Trust between students and parents, between teachers and families, between young people and the education system that is supposed to support them. Because here's the reality. Middle school is a turning point. It's when the texts get harder, the expectations rise, and reading becomes the gateway to everything else. And the data, it's a bit sobering. On the most recent National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, 2/3 of 8th graders were not reading at a proficient level. As Margaret explains,
well, it's a majority. Typically only about 1/3 of 8th graders score proficient in reading on NAEP. So that means that 2/3 of the kids that we're about to send off to high school are not going to be able to comprehend the text that they're going to encounter in high school. And the high school teachers aren't going to be the ones to teach them how to read. So we are really sending them off into the world without proficient reading skills.
And when we break down that data by subgroup, the disparities are even more alarming. Using the language of the NAEP, in 2024, 37% of white students were proficient in reading, compared to 16% of Black students and 19% of Hispanic students. Economically disadvantaged students, only 17% were proficient, compared to 41% of their more affluent peers. For those students designated as English learners, it was just 5%, versus 32% of their non-EL peers who scored in the proficient range. Lowry points out what that means for students' entire academic experience.
It's not like it's just happening in English class. I mean, because kids who are struggling readers are not going to be able to succeed and are having the same experience, probably more serious experiences in middle and high school social studies and science classes. This sense that I don't really know what's going on and I'm getting further and further behind. And the teacher sends home stuff for us to read and I just can't, so I don't even try.
And they don't disengage because they don't care. They disengage because that is a healthy protective response. We all have a drive to feel competent, a drive for self-integrity. So when school consistently makes students feel like failures, they retreat. And teachers often feel helpless, unsure how to reach these students. But we are not hopeless. Stephanie Simpson, the CEO of the Association for Middle Level Educators, works with educators across the country. She brings another important perspective.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. The mood swings are there. The learning to put deodorant on is there. It's a challenging time frame. One minute they're your best friend. The next minute they don't want to be in the same room as you, but they still need you. So yeah, it's a super challenging time. But I think we need to flip the script as the challenge is actually a huge opportunity, because this is the phase where they start thinking about who they want to be when they grow up, what kind of person they want to be, what they're really interested in, what they're not interested in. And more importantly, it's when they start thinking about whether they want to stay engaged with the school system. So we know that if they eventually drop out as a sophomore in high school, they started thinking about that usually around 6th grade. So it's really our last best chance to engage them. And if they come into our middle schools and don't have that foundational literacy that they need to be successful, they're going to not feel like they belong at school. They're not going to feel like they can engage with the content in a way that's meaningful to them. And they're going to start thinking about whether they belong there at all.
So can we all agree? When kids reach middle school and they're behind in reading, it's not just a problem in one subject. They begin to lose trust in school, in teachers, and in themselves as learners. And when that happens, we see the consequences: low self-esteem, withdrawal, acting out, and in far too many cases, giving up on school altogether. But let's bring it back to the students. The reason we're all here. Meet AJ, a former Story student. At the end of 8th grade, he shared a reflection on his progress as a reader.
At the beginning of the year, I thought I wasn't much of a fluent reader, and I thought that I kept pausing in the middle of reading a sentence. And the more I read, the more practice it took, I just became better.
We'll hear more from AJ later in this episode about what changed for him and what gave him confidence. But first, let's talk about what's being done to change the story for AJ and for thousands of students just like him, because we must do better for our middle schoolers and for our collective future. That's where STARI comes in, the Strategic Adolescent Reading Intervention. STARI was developed in partnership with Boston Public Schools by Dr. Lowry Hemphill and the SERP team, and was initially evaluated in 4 Massachusetts school districts. STARI was designed specifically for students in grades 6 and up who need more than remediation. They need relevance, they need rigor, and most importantly, they need respect. Stephanie Simpson, CEO of AMLE, put it this way.
So when those 10 to 15-year-olds start developing that ability to think abstractly rather than just concretely, and so they're really interested in their place in the broader world, when we put literature in front of them, or what we're asking them to read needs to be hyper relevant to them and to what they think is important. They feel like they can see themselves and the world around them in the text, and that they're not reading things that are too juvenile for them.
That insight resonates deeply with me and with many educators who have used STARI in their classrooms. Over the years, teachers have echoed the importance of providing materials that match students' maturity, even if their reading levels are behind grade level. Here's what 2 middle school teachers, Ms. Phillips Santos and Ms. Banks from New York City Public Schools, shared.
One of the challenges of teaching reading to adolescents has to do with motivation.
Especially with our low-level readers, their interests don't necessarily match up with books that align to their level, and so students get bored. Students feel like the text is too easy, it's babyish.
Middle school students don't want to be underestimated. They want materials that reflect who they are, what they care about, and who they're becoming. Here's how another STARI teacher, Sherry McKenzie, puts it.
All the kids that I get, they want to read the same books as the kids out in the other classes. It's just hard.
And that's the key. STARI gives students the support they need to become not just better readers, but more confident, engaged readers. Because adolescent literacy isn't just about decoding words. It's about building opportunity, identity, and agency. And this is where the SERP story begins. Let's go back to AJ, the student we heard from earlier, the one who didn't think of himself as a successful reader at the start of the year.
Story has actually helped me to become a better reader because we actually focused on what we're reading and understanding what we're reading.
That shift from avoidance to agency, that's what Story is all about. And that's why I hope you'll continue tuning into this season as we raise national awareness about the adolescent literacy crisis and spotlight the work of SERP, Strategic Education Research Partnership. This season is called Reading for Real, a story of shared commitment to helping all students become strong readers, no matter when or where they start. In our next episode, we'll go back to the very beginning, Story's origin story in Boston Public Schools, where then Superintendent Tom Pazant asked the SERP team to help address a growing middle school literacy challenge. You'll hear from more of the founding voices behind this work, including Dr. Suzanne Donovan, Dr. Catherine Snow, and Dr. James Kim. And let's be clear, this podcast isn't just about a reading program. Yes, Story is an evidence-based intervention for students who are 2 or more years behind in reading, but SERP Stories is about something bigger, the people behind the work, the researchers, the teachers, the families who all believe in second chances. Because we all should believe that reading success is possible, even after elementary school. If you're an educator, a parent, a policymaker, or simply someone who cares about helping bright middle schoolers become confident readers, this podcast is for you. Because it's never too late to support a student who wants to learn. As Dr. Margaret Troyer reminds us,
Learning to read is a skill set that's never finished.
Before I sign off, I've been asking every guest one question. How did you learn to read? Here's how AMLE CEO Stephanie Simpson answered. How did you learn to read?
Oh, that's a great question. I had the privilege of parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents who just loved to read with me. And in particular, I had an aunt who I really bonded with over fantasy stories like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And I can remember reading those together and getting really excited when the movies eventually came out. So I would say just a mutual love among my family of reading.
Thanks for listening to episode 1 of SERP Stories. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who cares about education because we've got more stories to tell. Be sure to subscribe to SERP Stories wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on the socials at SERP Institute. If you're curious about any of the tools, studies, or stories we mentioned, you'll find more at serpinstitute.org. Until next time, I'm Dr. Kayla Jones. SERP Stories is produced by the SERP Institute, where educators, researchers, and designers come together to tackle schools' most pressing challenges. Explore our work at serpinstitute.org.